How's it going, folks? Stu here. The Tragedy of Macbeth is the latest Shakespeare adaptation to hit our screens. It's screened at this year's London Film Festival, and it's directed by Cohen. And there's a very famous sort of superstition around Macbeth, which is that actors and actresses and people involved with productions won't say Macbeth in any theatre space unless they're doing the show, you know? It's bad luck. Bad things will happen. Luckily, I'm in my flat and not a theatre space, so I can say it as much as I want, and nothing bad's gonna happen. I'm free from all curses. Macbeth. Huh? Why not get Macbeth? Macbeth, 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 Macbeth. Nothing's happening. I'm fine. That's right, I saw The Tragedy of Macbeth, which, as I said, is directed by Cohen, one half of the Coen brothers, who you might know as being very, very, very good directors who have absolutely killed basically their entire filmography. And I was incredibly excited and interested to see how this thing would turn out. Firstly, just because it's a Coen brother singular film, Joel Cohen on his own, wanted to see what he was going to be doing, but also just because it's another, and I'm sure I don't need to explain this, but it's another adaptation of one of Shakespeare's most famous plays. You've definitely heard of Macbeth. It's been done many times before. And so you just get curious about how they're going to do things differently, what's going to justify doing a new adaptation of such a classic. And I'm happy to say that The Tragedy of Macbeth satisfies in basically every department there. This thing was fucking insane and it blew me away and I loved it. I don't need to explain the plot of Macbeth to you, do I? But I'll do it for anyone that doesn't know what it is. It's a lovely, heartwarming tale of a couple that are just having a tough time, and through a courageous tale filled with warmth, humor, good times, they learn that family and friendships are really the heart of all that's good in life. In case anyone actually doesn't know what Macbeth is about, and it's not actually about that even slightly. It's about a dude that gets a premonition from a bunch of witches that he's going to become king, and then he goes on a mad spiral of manic wildness, and bad shit happens to everyone around him. It's a lot of fun, absolutely. So Joel Cohen seems like a perfect fit for that sort of story, you know? He's done a lot of very successful, very admired and loved, sort of quirky, witty comedy films, and the pairing just adds up, right? I am, of course, being sarcastic there. I don't know if you picked up on that, but that was the first thing that really impressed me about this take on Macbeth, and that is that Joel Cohen absolutely leans and goes for an incredibly stark and very kind of brutalist approach to Macbeth, but in a way which is quite faithful to the source material. This isn't an adaptation that feels like it's going, we're going to tear the book up and do something wholly new with Shakespeare. It's an adaptation that sort of leans into the stuff that works about Shakespeare, but approaches it from its own unique visual storytelling perspective in terms of the way it's presented to us. So from a kind of textual standpoint, which I think is what a lot of people going into a new Shakespeare adaptation will be quite interested about, this one definitely feels very lean, very kind of refined and to the point and concise. It doesn't really feel like it's doing a whole lot different with these characters. Like, this isn't the craziest and wildest take on Lady Macbeth or Macbeth we've seen before, but it's elsewhere in the way that Cohen uses the medium of film to tell this story, that this thing really does have its own very obvious and unique approach. And it's just stunning. It's just a stunning adaptation in that sense. It's presented in black and white, which is the first most obvious kind of visual aspect of the film. You start and you're like, damn, this is a striking frame, and it never really loses that feeling. It's always there. It's a very literal sapping of life and color out of the frame, but it works really, really well to fill the entire story and the entire piece with this feeling of kind of bare bones, really brutal starkness. I don't even think that's a word, but I'm using it. And I love the way that it sort of throws together these theatrical and very cinematic elements in every aspect of it, which works perfectly for something like Shakespeare, which is obviously a very theatrical thing. I don't think I need to explain why that is. And Cohen never shies away from that, and in fact brings that into the frame at every point. And the set design reflects that with very kind of brutalist architecture, but very stark shapes, very plain rooms, I suppose, that allow the lighting in the scenes to really come to the forefront. I mean, at many points as well, you get glimpses through doorways and through windows, and it's very clearly just sort of like a stage backdrop. But at the same time, the lighting and the framing and everything comes together in a way which is only really possible through film. He very obviously changes light setups through shots a lot through this film, and I think that obviously on one hand shows a progression in a character's mental state and a change in their frame of mind very literally on screen for us, but just looks gorgeous. So everything looks gorgeous, even if it has an intention or not. It's a stunning film. And so I was basically just kind of wide-eyed, enthralled by this thing for the entire runtime. I will be thinking about the sets and the style and the lighting of this film for a long, long time. It is that impactful. And it's just impressive that it's doing that from Macbeth. Like, I'm sat here this excited about a new adaptation of Macbeth. And the performances are just so good as well. I mean, it's Shakespeare, so perhaps it's the most performance-y performances you could possibly get out of an actor. Bad Shakespeare performances bore me and make me sort of roll my eyes at them. And you can always tell when an actor or an actress doesn't quite understand what they're doing. But good Shakespeare performances will constantly keep you hanging on every word that they're saying, even though, and I'll admit it, I don't understand every line of every Shakespeare play that I've read or seen. Part of the enjoyment of Shakespeare is like, this dude writes like a maniac, but I love it, it's poetic. And Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand as Macbeth and Lady Macbeth respectively absolutely nail every soliloquy, every monologue, every bit of Shakespeare dialogue in here. They just crush it. Denzel Washington is Denzel Washington. He was never gonna have a bad time with this. And I will say at first I was like, okay, Denzel's doing his American accent. Let's see how this goes. Part of me was sort of hoping for like a groundskeeper Willie style over-the-top Scottish accent from Denzel, but I appreciate that was probably never gonna happen, so that's just gonna have to stick in my dreams for now on. But honestly, no surprises, it just quickly becomes Macbeth and not Denzel Washington. And Frances McDormand as well as Lady Macbeth, yeah, yes please. This is, I mean, yes. I can't believe it's taken this long to see Frances McDormand as Lady Macbeth because it feels like the perfect casting for this character. She's always had this really interesting quality as an actress where you're like, I don't want to fuck with you, but I also feel a lot for you. She really finally balances that sort of sadness, but also really sort of cunning, stoic presence. Obviously, that works brilliantly for Lady Macbeth, but the rest of the cast are really, really good. Catherine Hunter is probably my standout, to be honest, as the sisters, the witches that lay this sort of prophecy at Macbeth's feet at the beginning of the film and crop up throughout. She is so good and so unbelievably, I want to shit my pants right now, scary throughout this entire thing. Every scene with the witches was just tingles all over me. I mean, we've also got Dudley himself, Harry Melling as Malcolm, who I thought was really good. And just shout out to him for having an insanely good career after Harry Potter. The dude's crushing it. But really, despite having incredibly memorable and brilliant performances, the standout of this thing is the way it's presented, is the look of this thing. I guess it goes without saying that if you haven't seen any Shakespeare or read Macbeth or seen Macbeth before, maybe you'll get a bit lost with the story, but I think that's just down to Shakespeare being Shakespeare. If you've never heard Shakespeare before, you're just gonna be lost, my friend. There's nothing to help you there. But I think part of the brilliance of the way Coen goes about showing this film in a very visual way is that I think it makes the harder to read parts of Macbeth a little bit more easier to follow visually. I found this to be a worthwhile adaptation. It's giving something new, and it's just an incredibly impressive directorial feat from Joel Coen as his first standalone film as a director. Loved this thing, can't wait to watch it again. I think it's going to sweep the absolute ever-living shit out of some awards this season, so we can look forward to that. But what about you guys? Did you manage to catch the Tragedy of Macbeth as it screened at this year's London Film Festival, or are you excited to check it out? Believe it drops in theatres in December before going to Apple TV Plus in January. Please, I've said it for basically every film I've seen yet, but go and see this thing in a cinema if you can. It's just not going to have the same impact watching it at home on your sofa. I don't care if I sound snobby saying that. But if you have caught it, let me know what you thought about it down in the comments below. We'll have a little chat. As usual, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see me talk about more shit, go ahead and click subscribe. Link's down there. Or would say link? Button. Click the button. See you guys soon for some more thoughts on the many more films that I caught at the festival. But until next time, someone give Catherine Hunter a hug? I just think she needs it.